Hey, welcome to the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute with your host, the alchemist of Indiana's Black Forest, Alan Bishop. Hey, this channel is all about home distilling and legal distilling. If you've got questions, reach out to us in the comments below, social media, or via bishopshomegrown@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out thealchemistcabinet.com. Still here. Marathon session, like I said, so... anyways, I'm going to try to knock out 3 questions with one video here, and a diversity of questions as it is. So, from Jim Pierce on a YouTube comment, and unfortunately I didn't print the entirety of the YouTube comment, but I think I know where you're going. Watched a video from Whiskey Central talking about condensers, shell versus worm. She was saying that the worms give you heavier distillate over shell condenser. I believe she also said that a worm will help you with esterification, but not 100% sure, and that's where it cuts off. Anyways, we talked about shell and tube and worm and all that stuff, serpentine here a couple times, especially in conjunction with Scotch whiskey and a little bit of forced reflux. So in Scotland, you'll see much more use of the worm than you will in the United States. In Cognac, you'll see much more use of the worm than you will in the United States. Worms have become something that you don't see very often in large commercial distilleries in the United States. Unless it's specifically a moonshine-based distillery, then you'll see a lot more worms. I myself love worms. I love condensers of all types. I love Lebegs, I love shell and tube, and I love worms. They're all tools in the toolbox. They all have different uses. She is absolutely right in what she's saying, and that the worm will give you a heavier distillate. So those distillates in Scotland, for example, that you get that are heavier or meatier, as they like to call them, meatier. I know that my Hoosier slang gets in the way, and I sound like cornbread sometimes. I said hoochware the other day, and one of you guys thought I said doucheware. So I have to presume that either I'm that cornbread or you're just being an asshole. I don't know which one it is, but it was a funny comment. I'll give you that much. Anyways, those meatier distillates, those heavier, especially like the Isla distillates and stuff like that, that is related to the worm being used without any reflux on the still. And what you get is a little bit of H2S SO2 coming across. There is a little bit of that sulfur compound that comes across that can be a positive. We talk a lot about positive flavor and negative flavor here on the channel, right? And I've explained that just because there's a lot of flavor to something doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good flavor. But if you are looking for those heavier distillates, a worm will get you that every single time. Now, as far as the esterification thing, I would have to watch the video to see exactly what she was saying, and I will go look for it here in a little bit because I am curious. The only way I could see a worm playing more into esterification would be if it's a copper worm versus a stainless steel shell and tube condenser. As far as a copper worm versus a copper shell and tube condenser, the esterification also involves copper process. So you've got more surface area in a shell and tube, which is one of the reasons why you're able to clean up the distillate a little bit more with a shell and tube versus a worm. The only thing I can see maybe playing into esterification with the worm is because you do have a little bit more air contact during the condensation process than you do in a shell and tube. So a shell and tube's pretty instantaneous, right? The vapor comes over, it hits a certain section of shell and tube, and it's not like it slowly condenses. It flash condenses and falls through, right? Versus on a worm, it slowly kind of condenses as it comes down, and as it's doing that, it's meeting air. Maybe that's what she's getting at with esterification. I can't verify that. I couldn't tell you from a qualitative perspective that I've ever noticed that myself. But maybe she knows some stuff that I don't know, and that's completely a possibility because I am not the world's smartest man, nor the world's best distiller. I'm just a very lucky distiller that's very passionate about what I do. So hopefully that sort of addressed your question or commentary there. If not, let me know and I'll come back to it for sure. You're going to see me talk a lot more about condensers in a video in the near future because I have multiple types of condensers. The only thing that I don't have right now, I used to have one, is a double wall condenser. I don't have a lot of experience with those, and I may have to talk to somebody about building a double wall condenser. Maybe that'd be a Wayne Herbert or a Jason Wade Harrell project in the future. 13 Stills or Ozark Stillworks. So, let's see. So, Anthony Wilson, can you tell me if changing from a 2-inch diameter by 12-inch tall pot still head to a 3 or 4-inch head would speed up my runtime while maintaining the same quality spirit? I've researched this and have found conflicting answers. I trust you would know such an answer. Thank you for your time. So going from a 2-inch port to a 3 or 4, I mean, I'm presuming you're running a fairly small still. So the only way it would really speed anything up would be if you were running a larger still and you know, all that vapor wasn't able to get through that 2-inch in a timely manner. If you go to a 3-inch, you obviously have more surface area for it to travel through. That would speed up the distillation. But honestly, I'm going to guess, you know, if you're dealing with something underneath, say, 20 gallons, I don't think you're going to see that noticeable of a difference between the 2 and the 3-inch. I could be wrong, but I highly doubt you're going to. The only thing that's going to affect the speed of your distillation there is the heat input and whether or not you have agitation. So agitation, a lot of people don't know that. If you have a still it's agitated, not only can you run solids on the inside, but it will run substantially faster than a still without agitation, right? Because all that liquid's moving around, it's all coming in contact with the surface. And especially with straight-sided Appalachian-style moonshine stills, what takes them so long to run is they're in a column, right? So law of thermodynamics, heat rises. So what you actually have happen is that still sort of separates into 3 unique areas of temperature. You have the bottom that's on top of the burner getting hot. It has to flip over to the top. All the stuff on the top comes down into the bottom. It has to get hot. Then it has to flip over again, and the stuff in the middle coming down, right? So it takes a little longer to heat one of those than does a turnip still, for example, because you're heating in a column, so to speak. So as far as maintaining the same quality, honestly, a 2 or a 3, as long as you're not forcing either too much through at one time or too little, you're not constricting, right? Quality should be about the same. You know, the only place that quality is going to change is if you go, you know, above, say, a 20-gallon still. And even then 2-inch is kind of small, but it'd be okay. I mean, the Dr. Gratis stuff, it's 2-inch, and some of the other stuff I have is 2-inch, and quality-wise, it does a fine job as it is, for sure. If you were going over a 20-gallon still, I'd say upgrade to that 3-inch for sure. Just so volume-wise, it kind of makes more sense. And you do have some more copper surface area for the vapor. You know, I presume maybe you have more copper surface area. I don't know. They may be the same height. I don't know. I think you said that, but those are just kind of my thoughts on it anyways. So, again, I'm going to move through these pretty quick. So I'm moving on to the third one now, and let's see what it is. So, it's Jason Wade Harrell of 13 Stills, and he's talking about my currently stalled, was currently stalled cranberry mash that I now have fixed. So this is, for those who don't know, I did a cranberry craisin. It was craisins is what it was. Oat and sugar wash for a neutral to test on the 13 Stills, one piece at a time crossover still, the Black Forest edition. And between the cold weather and the pH, I stalled that thing like 3 times. I got it rolling fine now. It's going to finish very quickly, and we will have our quote-unquote liquor ghosts. I don't have liquor fairies like Bearded and Board does. I have liquor ghosts to deal with that in the near future. But he says, I was talking to Thad about the cranberries. I guess that it may be the pH, which I've never tested pH. Can you tell us about pH levels and how it affects our mashes? So 2 things. So on the cranberries, part of the pH issue was probably the cranberries themselves, but the other part is I suspect that they were heavy with preservatives, which crashed my pH at least once I know of. The second time is I went to a higher gravity and only adjusted the pH up a little bit because the initial pH was like down in the low 4s, which really for brandy isn't all that bad normally. But both those times I had pitched just Red Star yeast because it's what I had with me, just active dry baker's yeast, which is not adapted to those pHs at all, because I was too lazy to walk back outside and walk back to where I keep all my other yeast stored. So the third time, when I adjusted the pH using baking soda, I then pitched an appropriate brandy yeast that will go to a lower pH, and that kicked everything off the way it should be. So as far as pH, so typically what you're after, one of the reasons people always look for limestone water back in the day was because of the pH as well as the minerals. The pH here in southern Indiana on most of our limestone water is going to be 6.5, 6.7. By the time, if you're doing an all grain, you drop all of your grain in there and you've cooked it in, you would like your pH to be 5.2 to 5.5. 5.5 is kind of industry standard. If you're not there, a lot of times people will use things to get there, either sour mashing, so using some of the spent mash from the previous run to lower the pH, or citric acid, or you do nothing and you can possibly use malolactic bacteria, which if you propagate your own yeast, you're probably also growing malolactic bacteria that's symbiotic with that yeast in that particular liquid environment, which will also drop the pH. Now, pH is important for a number of reasons. Not least of all is because pH can affect your enzymes, whether you're using natural enzymes or exogenous enzymes. They do have a recommended range of pH where those work more efficiently than they do outside of that range, but also secondarily because of your yeast. Depending on your yeast strain may or may not adapt to a certain pH. So most of your whiskey yeast, they like that 5.5 range. And they'll drop maybe by the time they finish. You know, you might have a 4.8 on the real low side. You know, 5.0 is probably a little more common. With your brandies, you know, your brandy yeast, they'll take lower pHs because brandy tends to be a lot more acidic. Fruit juice tends to be a lot more acidic. So some of those brandy yeast and some of the brandy musts, for example, some of the wines that you'll make to distill with, I mean, I've seen stuff at 3.3, right? And there are only certain yeasts that you can use that'll go down to 3.3 and actually finish that out, because otherwise the pH will crash and you'll stall everything. So it really depends on the material you're working with, you're starting with, what the pH of it is, what the yeast is that you're using. And if you're going to cross over, so you want to use, say, a whiskey yeast for brandy, is not likely going to work. You can use a brandy yeast for whiskey if you lower the pH of the whiskey, which I do a lot of at my current distillery with either lactobacillus and or citric acid, which we've talked about in the past, because I like the fruity flavor profiles I can pull from brandy yeast in particular in my products. So with your sugar shines and things like that, 5.5 is a really good starting point in general, right? You can be a little bit above that. You could even be up to, 5.8, somewhere in there. And on the sugar shines, it's not nearly as important, just in general, overall. And when I say sugar shine, I mean 1 pound of grain per gallon, 1 pound of sugar per gallon, etc., right? I'm not talking pure sugar. Anyways, I hope that answers your questions, guys. As always, reach out to me, bishopshomegrown@gmail.com, thealchemistcabinet.com, social media, and or the comments below in YouTube. All right, guys, later.